Welcome to the Race and Identity Dialogue series at Lander University. A university is a place for debates of ideas, and universities are at their best when students have models of good dialogue on important topics before them, particularly when topics have widespread public discussion. All speakers in this series are responsible for their own presentations and comments, just as all audience participants are responsible for any views that they choose to express. All participants, speakers, and audience members must follow the guidelines provided in this video presentation for engaging in effective dialogue. The series is supported by funds from the National Endowment for the Humanities through a grant from South Carolina Humanities, an organization that provides programming to enrich the cultural and intellectual lives of all South Carolinians. We appreciate the support from South Carolina Humanities and encourage you to learn more online at schumanities.org. The series is offered by Landers College of Behavioral and Social Sciences and supported by the university's Diversity Advisory Council. It joins other campus programming to address issues of justice, diversity, equity, and inclusion. While Lander has focused attention on race this academic year, it provides programming each year on a variety of topics for students and community members. In recent years, that programming has addressed topics as varied as cybersecurity, World War I, German unification, nonprofit organizations, and debates by candidates for public office.
This new opportunity invites students, faculty, and staff to have hard conversations, to learn new things about themselves, about the communities in which they live, and about our world. When we think about topics such as power, privilege, civil rights, civic engagement, advocacy, ethics, vocational discernment, sometimes we don't have real conversations about these topics. They just kind of get said and talked about around the periphery without a deep dive into what these things really mean and why they matter. Why do they matter? There are lots of things that matter and lots of people that matter that we don't talk about enough in our classrooms, in our social circles, in our faith communities, around the kitchen table. And so this series will invite you to examine yourselves, your thoughts about these topics and others, to grow in your relationships, and to cultivate conversations, more conversations around race and identity in your everyday lives. We hope that your eyes will be opened and that you will look at the world through new lenses, through hearing from dynamic speakers and watching the videos that are a part of this series, but also coming to the live discussions.
This series affirms that racism is real, and even though American society and law have made much progress on civil rights over time, injustices still exist today. The framework for the race and identity dialogue is storytelling. By that, we mean that speakers will share their own stories, presentations, will teach about the stories of authors and activists, and audience members are invited to tell their own stories as they engage in dialogue. Thus, we actively want folks to bring your own stories, opinions, values, and feelings to this series. To participate is to be brave, to learn more about yourself, and to learn more about others. Conversations about race and identity are not easy, even if they are necessary. To best promote learning, listening, and effective dialogue, we expect the following of all participants: listen actively, think critically, ask questions, use I statements, be respectful to all. Again, we want you to understand that racism is real. Injustices are still present. A journey of academic inquiry allows participants to learn, reflect, and consider. Learning allows us to better equip ourselves to be active citizens. Come learn with us and participate in the Race and Identity Dialogue series. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 2021 season of Race and Identity Dialogue. My name is Dr. Shawnette Parker, and I'm a visiting lecturer of psychology at Lander University.
I'm Dr. Zach Rubin. I am an assistant professor of sociology in the Department of Government Criminology and Sociology at Lander University.
Hello, I'm Reverend Alexis Carter Thomas, and I'm an adjunct professor in the religion department at Lander University. This session is taking place on Thursday, January 21st, but it is pre-recorded. The recording for this session is taking place on Thursday, January 7th, a day after the attack on our nation's capital by domestic terrorists. In the wake of the violence, the racism, the anarchy, there are so many feelings and words, and we cannot avoid them. We cannot circumvent them when we talk about privilege, prejudice, and power. We must talk about the history of this nation, which we will talk about in different sessions throughout this series. But it's also important for us to name the current state of affairs in our world. That when you're watching this, it will be the day after the inauguration of the 46th president and vice president of the United States. And so we all come with the heaviness, the maybe hopefulness, the struggles, and the lenses through which we see the world, the lenses through which we understand prejudice, privilege, and power. Maybe words that make us uncomfortable, perhaps words that we don't fully understand and that have different meanings when we use them in different contexts. And so today, we hope to spend time talking about them. And we hope that in this conversation that you will learn something, you will be awakened to something within yourselves, within your communities, and that we will each grow and become better people, better humans and citizens as a result of our conversations and being willing to understand and to look inwardly first before we name outwardly the prejudice, privilege, and power around us.
Yeah, so it's really interesting as Reverend Carter Thomas was talking, and I start to think about this conversation and where I want to go with that. I just have to reiterate what she's saying and to the audience that it is a bit of a challenge, when you have your perspective on what these three things are: prejudice, privilege, and power. And through my life, I've always felt like I know what that is. I've experienced it. But when you see new things happen, it's like, wow, it's almost like a slap in the face, a little bit like, you think that we've gotten past certain things. You think that, okay, we're in a better spot, in a better place. And then you get hit with these events. And I think what's even been harder for me is realizing how divided so many of us still are sometimes in our thoughts and our perspectives, because the commentary that comes about after this and the social media commentary, and I'm sure that many of you have experienced this, and the things that are being said in light of all of this, it's amazing to me. And so I know I've been thinking about just how the media can slant information, and I want to be a part of this group of people who is giving the good and the correct information. But at the end of the day, I know a lot of it is still based on my opinion. But I think that my opinion is the right opinion, but I suppose that's what everybody thinks, right? But it's like wanting to be a part of the solution and not the problem, and constantly going through this, like questioning myself and saying, I don't want to be like those that I even see within media and television news and be faulted in the same way. But again, we're coming to you because we can only speak from our perspective and how we internalize some of the events and things that take place, but then even still looking at these three things from a historical lens. So this is why we want to have this conversation right now. This is why we're probably even engaging in some of the chat that's going on in Crowdcast, and we'll have a longer dialogue and be able to really just talk about where we are today and where we are now. So I just felt the need to kind of just say that's kind of where my head is right now before we even jump into the heart of the conversation. So Dr. Rubin, just before we even start talking about our topics, just like your initial thoughts as we even enter into this space.
Oh my God. So yeah, this attack on the Capitol, and like you said, I've been active on social media, trying to survey all of the different opinions going on. And one of the major strains I keep seeing is that if this was a mostly non-white group that had done the same thing, they would not been treated with such a sort of laying down of arms or rolling over, and people would not have been able to enter the Capitol without some form of resistance and force from the police. The police would have been much better prepared and have fought back. And I don't know that we can say that with 100% certainty, but we can, as you suggest, Dr. Parker, look back at some historical examples where, white groups, predominantly white groups, have been treated with a great deal of leniency by law enforcement, and predominantly non-white groups have been treated with not so much leniency. I'm thinking particularly of the protests at Standing Rock, where a Native American tribe encamped near an oil pipeline that was to be built on their land, actually on sacred parts of their land, as opposed to through a nearby town. And that it was decided that because it was this reservation and nobody was literally living on that part of the land, that the government could just roll in and approve a permit to go through their land. And, people camped out there for many months only to be sprayed by fire hoses in below freezing temperatures and, shot with rubber bullets and stuff. Meanwhile, in other recent memories, you have occupations of, for example, the Michigan State House, that a group of armed protesters took over the Michigan Capitol House to protest Governor Gretchen Whitmer's COVID lockdowns, and they just rolled over and let them in there, and nothing happened. They were armed a bunch of them were armed to the teeth. And also the takeover of right-wing activists of the Maliner Wildlife Refuge. It was the Cliven Bundy's sons is a pretty well-known rancher who sued the government, and then his sons took over this national park. And I think one person went to jail after a standoff that lasted weeks. And they in that case were treated very leniently by police. So I don't want to make a direct comparison and say, like this crowd was treated differently. I want to suggest that if we look back at those historical examples, that there may be some indication I think we can safely say that it probably would have been different.
Yeah.
And one other caveat I want to add to that I use the phrase right-wing protesters, and I have friends all over the political spectrum. I want to be very clear that I'm talking about a specific subset of ideology that has sort of found a home in, conservative circles in our country. And I don't want to indict all of my other friends who are conservatives or Republicans simply because they are sort of sharing a home in a political party. That I think, this in a different set of circumstances, this ideology could have found a home in other parts of the political spectrum. It's a poisonous white supremacist ideology that is currently latched on to one part of the political spectrum.
I fully agree with that. And I think I can echo that sentiment. And as we were talking, the first thing that came to mind as you were describing certain situations and standoffs, like to me, that just is a prime example of privilege. Like I see that. I mean, I personally will make the claim that it would have been different if the group of people looked different, right? And I just have personally, I feel like enough evidence to show me. And when we look at the different situations when you have large groups of Black people marching and going into places to where just even the presence of the police on the onset and beforehand, and even the thought of having a group that big there would have been different preparations. It's different. And I think of it being different because of privilege. And so maybe even jumping even into that conversation, I'll go to you, Alexis, like, is that what privilege looks like? Or is this one example of that you have the privilege of being, because I asked myself that question, it's like, how come a group of thousands of white Americans primarily aren't seen as threatening as a group of anybody else. Like, that's what it feels like to me. And I'm happy to accept if I'm wrong, but that's what, and to me, I feel like it's because of this privilege that exists.
Privilege and prejudice and power can be dangerous combinations. I want to name that the three of those together, depending on where you fall in socioeconomic life in America, can mean life or death. I think about, I saw a post recently on social media about Miriam Carey, who was the Black woman who was having a mental health crisis. And I think she was trying to make a U-turn near the US Capitol, I believe in 2013. And she was killed because she was shot 5 times because she breached security barriers. And her 13-month-old was in the car. And I think about like, as simple as that, like, one, I shouldn't say simple, I meant like that one instance, people are like, well, that's one, but it's like, no, that's one of many. Like, the fact that people can breach the US Capitol barriers, and not just people, large masses of people can move into chambers, sit at the dais, take photos. Capitol Police don't know where they'd be found. When you, as a leader and a nation, leaders, and I thank you, Dr. Rubin, for naming the very particular type that it's not about. I'm not even talking party affiliation or specific race. I'm talking about a very specific ideology that allows one to live into a prejudice, privilege, and power that creates a sense of frenzy, anarchy, violence that can be sanctioned by the state, that can be sanctioned by a nation. Whereas if I just can't even imagine if people of color had tried to do that. And when I think of Black Lives Matter, that Dr. Parker mentioned, and just protests that were even peaceful. And there's been numbers to say that even at peaceful protest around the murder of George Floyd last year, that hundreds of people were arrested in peaceful protests. And you had, National Guard, you had people in armor, you had sometimes tanks, depending on the city. And so you came with armored vehicles and people who were protesting police brutality. And then I think I'm concerned when we can't critique ourselves, period. Like, not just, as a whole, when we can't do self-critique, and when we're so busy critiquing others, prejudice, privilege, and power, as I named at the beginning, that we can't step back and say, it's not that all people on the left do it right all the time, or all people on the right, or all Democrats, all people of color. That's not the issue. I think part of being in an academic space, and one of the goals and aims of race and identity, is academic inquiry, is critical inquiry, to be able to examine and to think about what we believe, how we live that out, and how we speak about that, specifically on social media, how we espouse certain beliefs, what we like, what are our news sources, because all of us, none of us are exempt from being some sense, I'm trying to find a good word. I want to say tainted, corrupted, brainwashed, but in some sense, right? From the prejudice, privilege, and power of people we listen to, whether it's people on screens or people in our own homes, people who in our faith communities and friendships we have and family relationships, none of us are exempt. And so I think what's important to name going forward in this dialogue, and also when we go into breakout sessions and in future dialogues, is we all just sometimes need to take a break and do some self-reflection and inquiry and say, like, you know what, how are my own prejudice? When have I acted one way against a particular person because of their race, their ethnicity, their sexuality, that I might not have acted had they been another?
There are ways that we might talk about measuring and seeing and conceptualizing all of this power, privilege, prejudice. We might look at a wage gap between whites and other racial and ethnic groups. We might look at the composition of Congress and the representation of non-white skin colors there, or the boards of Fortune 500 companies, and all these other ways that we might sort of draw boundaries around, this is power or this is privilege. Mm-hmm. But when we're talking about, the attack on the Capitol and this, like, if they weren't predominantly white, it would have been different. that's more of like, I know it when I see it. That's more of a sort of squishy analysis of the situation. So how might we, as we're trying to answer your question about like, how do we confront our own privilege and our own power and our own prejudice? Like, what are some of the ways we might think about little instances of that, ways of drawing boundaries around it and saying, okay, this is an instance of that. How do we recognize that? How might we sometimes misrecognize that? For me, for example, I grew up in one minority community, Jewish background, which is not the same as being other types of religious minorities, racial or ethnic minorities. And so in order to understand experiences other than my own, I've really tried to read stories and literature, which I know we're going to be spending quite a bit of time on throughout the RID sessions this semester on that. Just read other stories other than myself. And so I learned this whole thing about black hair that I never knew, by reading stories about hair, and that it's just so significantly different from my hair. I was always like, why does someone not want to go swimming or has to put their hair up to go swimming, because it just reacts so differently. And I could have made something ignorant, said something prejudiced or ignorant about a friend who was wary about going swimming, not knowing something about them. And that's just like one little tiny, like, I can point to that, learning that thing about someone who is different from me as a way that I can sort of overcome even the tiniest, I guess, microaggression is a common word for that, of prejudice, because I don't want to, it's just unintentional, but not going out and learning more about that, is a way of sort of retrenching back into the position of privilege.
Well, and I like what you said there, because I think that's what, number one, it points to that sometimes we have different prejudices unknowingly. Like we don't realize that. And it's important to take that step to be around other people, to delve into different experiences so that you can break some of those layers away. And I don't know, I mean, sometimes I question, like, is it really a microaggression if you didn't know you were doing it? But I suppose at the same time, intentions and people's perception is reality. So at the end of the day, it is. But I guess the way that we combat that and pull away from it is to build our knowledge and to have an understanding. And I think then once you build the knowledge and you have an understanding and you still do those things, you still have, snarky comments, then we're talking, all right, this is leaning more into the prejudice side. This is leaning more into you have some, not even necessarily implicit bias, you have this overt biases that you're not willing to accept the difference. But I feel like sometimes, like when I'm approached and I have those different experiences, and hair, since you named that, because my hair has always been a topic of conversation. And I just remember growing up and and I did activities and events to where I was probably one of the only Black girls. And I remember being on the dance team and, I was the only Black girl there, and everybody wanted to wear their hair the same way. Of course, my hair couldn't do what their hair would do. And I can think back to, there was some very specific differences in terms of my teammates who accepted the fact that my hair wouldn't do it. And I talked to them about it, and they touched my hair and we shared. And I was like, so this is what I have to do different. They were like, okay, great. Let's figure out some hairstyles that would look good for all of us. The teammates, and sometimes even one of my coaches, who was like, nope, I don't care. You need to make it work. Now you are showing prejudice, right? Because I've taught you about it. I've shown you, what it is. And now you're not willing to accept that. And so, but those original young ladies that at first, when they, were just moving forward and saying, well, let's do our hair this way, let's have it, let's all look the same. I don't fault them, and I don't put them, that at least initial thing, in the category of being prejudiced, because they just didn't know. But yes, once you kind of know and you're taught and you learn experience and you continue to hold on to that, to me, that's what defines prejudice. So I think, I don't know if this is fully answering your question, but if we had to lift a major point, I think one of our first ways of being able to address not having certain prejudices within ourselves, not having these microaggression faux pas, is that we have to learn, we have to experience. But once we do learn about it, we have to be accepting. Because what I'm assuming, Dr. Rubin, is that once you started learning about the hair in the different salons and places, you're like, okay, I can get with that. pretty cool. That's interesting that you do that with your hair, and I don't have a problem with it. And it's good, and you feel more comfortable with even just having that conversation or just even recognizing that there's a difference.
And so, yes, Dr. Rubin, I think you answered that well about where do we start practically for, students, community members, professors who are a part of this dialogue. I believe it starts with naming our blind spots and being willing to do what's in our power to expand our knowledge and to educate ourselves, whether that means having conversations, learning about Black hair for some. For others, it could be watching movies that maybe aren't usually our, preferences, to say, I need to educate myself. It is 2021. There are resources out there. I mean, so many resources, right? Whether there's TED Talks, documentaries. I've learned about things I've never known about through documentaries. And so I think one of the ways we reduce our own prejudice and look inward is to start not just with self-reflection, but conversation and dialogue with people who are different and have expertise. Maybe expertise is not always in degrees or academic space, thriving, but it's like their very life experiences speak other truths that maybe we think are lies, but we open ourselves up to listen. And so I think that's one key way that we open ourselves up. And I think sometimes through reviewing data, we may have different thoughts about what are facts and data, but when I think about one of the most recent numbers, that there are 87.4 million, I believe, worldwide who've contracted the coronavirus. I think we have to give attention to that. A year ago, we didn't know much. A year ago, January 2020, we were learning new things and taking information and hearing these reports. But we have to be careful of our news sources, but also open ourselves up to news sources. Listen to our language. I believe in the video that is the precursor to this that has our guidelines. Think about inflammatory language. Think about how we label things. Chinese virus, things that can create these toxic perceptions, right? Of prejudice, privilege, and power. Who gets to name things? When I think about last year with Black Lives or how many families, I think about this as a major kind of stratification when we think about families who had to homeschool, who didn't often have resources. I was watching a segment the other day on TV, and it was about a student through a nonprofit that was started by some college students who received a computer because she was doing her homework on her mom's smartphone for most of the year. And I was just thinking, there are lots of people like that. Do we even realize those kinds of power and privilege, things that are at work in the world, that people are losing educational advancement, that some sense they're getting behind because of a lack of tech resources, sometimes being in homes, having to stay home where school was an outlet. School was a space of, freedom from homes that maybe had toxic, abusive spaces. So I think when we look at 2020 as a whole, whether it was coronavirus, a change to how we all are doing life with distancing and technology, how that privileges some thrive, right, in tech spaces due to the resources and due to maybe parents who have certain resources, or they have a quiet room in their home. And they don't share a bedroom with multiple siblings and, just the things, food insecurity. And so I think not just do we have to educate ourselves on things that we're interested in, but we have to challenge ourselves to learn about things that are not even on our radar. It wasn't on my radar for a while that people don't have tech to do school, or that people who are being asked to, their colleges and universities that are closed, that they are now at home, where being in a dorm room was life-giving to them. And being at home is some sense it's a death dealing situation, depending on the situation, and so I think we learn and we educate ourselves in ways we can, and we push ourselves, we really challenge ourselves to look at prejudice, privilege, and power in ways that we are not always comfortable with and that we don't have to face every day.
Yeah, and Reverend Carter Thomas, you speak, I agree with everything you just said, and this, I think, is the importance of what we're doing with this series this semester, to be exploring different experiences through stories and storytelling, That's, you know, Dr. Parker, I assume you're much like me. We traffic professionally in data and, you know, hard empirical observations that depersonalizes a lot of what we are interested in, and stories bring those back to light. Like, we can talk about what percentage of South Carolinians are without home internet because, you know, rural internetification is far behind in the state. But until you look at the home life of one of our students and the struggles they have to go through because they don't have home internet, that fact means something, but it's not, you know, the full impact of it is not felt without the power of a story told about it.
Right.
There's an art to a good story is sometimes they're very particularizing and sometimes they're very universalizing. And I guess, you know, it's on us as the reader to seek out enough stories, to seek out enough different kind of stories to know the difference between when a story is one or the other. And a good piece of fiction, which I love a good piece of fiction. And in fact, when the little amount of time I have to read for fun,
Yeah.
I usually tend to seek out authors of color and try to understand experiences different from my own. Sometimes there's 1,000 stories wrapped up into one story. I recently read a book called Dear Martin by Nick Stone. She's a author in the Atlanta suburbs, graduate of an HBCU. I won't give the whole story away, but like, her story is about a young Black man and his interaction with the police, but it's also thousands of stories of other young Black men and their interaction with the police at the same time. And it's meant to be sort of on that universalizing side. And you know, it just helped me to understand that experience a lot more to read it.
Mm-hmm.
No spoilers. That's all I'm going to say. Go read it. Support a local author.
Yeah.
No, that's good, Dr. Rubin. That kind of leads into some of the things I was thinking around stories and data about. For example, I had a friend recently, a dear friend of mine, you know, who I'm questioning some of her political allegiances and thoughts around policy and such. So we had this conversation about it. And when she was like, Alexis, I just don't understand why you believe this. Everyone else I know, even all the other people of color, think this way. And I finally had to say, like, in a very friendly, but like a harsh way, like, you need to open up your circles. You need to come up with some new friends. And I say that to all of us today to say, like, if all of the stories you hear are the same vein, if like you were able to say, well, all of the people I know, or I knew, you know, Dr. Parker mentioned this, like, we got to be careful about generalizing. Black people, all people, Jewish people are not a monolith. You know, like, we have different experiences. If you can be in an academic institution of, you know, if you have gotten to the age of 17 or 18 and all of your friendships and all of your circles believe what you believe, possess the same ideologies, it is time to examine your own sense of prejudice, privilege, and power, because it means you have a lot of it in some way.
Right.
If we can get through life, right, where everybody thinks like us, we're missing out, right? Like, Zach, you would be missing out on Black hair and knowing these things. We all are missing out thinking people's hair is just like us and people live and think like we do. So let's enlarge the circle.
And I think because we tend to do it because it's comfortable, right? It feels good to just go around people. And there's moments where you might need that. I mean, just today, I can honestly say there's moments where I have, after yesterday watching all the news, again, we're pre-recorded this, the stuff in the Capitol. And then today I'm like, okay, I need a break. I don't want to hear from anybody else who doesn't believe the way I believe. But I know, like you said, though, as an academic, as someone who's open-minded, that I need to hear different perspectives. I need to hear different opinions and different take on how this is. If anything, just to either reaffirm my own beliefs and to understand that, but I don't go into the conversations with this idea that I'm going to hear you out just so I can solidify what I believe. It's just to make sure to keep, because again, this is, like you said, me keeping in check my own sense of power, privilege, and prejudice, and making sure that I am not being such by being willing to hear from other people, to listen to other stories, to consume that, so that I can have better, well-informed intentions and move forward in life in a way that says, I'm not staying stuck in my own bubble. I am thirsty for conversation. I'm excited to talk to people, to learn from other people, to grow closer and build deeper connections. And that's what this is about, you know. And it's not about, like, yes, I want to see us grow and change. But us presenting these ideas through the race and identity dialogue is not because we're trying to push a certain thought, you know, in your head, or tell you what you should think about or how you should think. Let me rephrase that. I'm trying to tell you some things to think about, but not how you should think about them, right? I do want you to recognize there's so much that we need to think about that maybe you aren't thinking about it, but I'm not here to tell a person how they should be. I'm not here to tell a person this is what you should think. And you know, that you need to believe in the same way that I believe. This is the whole point, is formulate your own thoughts. I just have this optimism that when you hear from other people, when you hear different perspectives, when you hear all sides of stories, that it's impossible for you not to shift. It's impossible for you not to change and grow and to think about things in a different way.
Good.
Can I also third what you're saying and do it very briefly with a visual aid? On the left, these are essentially two loudspeakers shouting at each other. One says, "We challenge because truth is false," representing, you know, dissent and conflict. And another saying, "Our tradition, we believe without questioning." And if you put them together, it says, "We challenge our tradition because we believe truth without questioning is false." Mm-hmm. At the bottom, it says, "Confrontation, it hurts, but at least it reaches across the gap. And even the most irreconcilable oppositions can begin to make sense once you get them together." Mm-hmm. This hung in my uncle's bedroom when he was a kid in the 60s. And I came across it in my grandparents' basement and took it up, had it framed, and it's been with me ever since. It's been a really influential piece of art. Sort of its own, in the way that it says 1,000 words, a story of its own. And that sort of outlines my view, which I think mirrors what you all have been saying as well.
Thank you for sharing that, Dr.
Yes,
Rubin.
absolutely.
I'd love to even see that printed up close. Thank you.
Yeah.
And I think as we close, I think it's important to name, Dr. Parker hit on this, the voices we listen to. And I think even Dr. Rubin talking about reading other voices. And I think it's important to name, when talking about prejudice, privilege, and power, that sometimes we elevate certain voices. For some of you who are a part of this discussion, you may have never had a Black female professor or teacher in your primary school days. And perhaps you haven't had teachers of color. Some of you have. But I also think about, and I name this as someone who has had to work through this in my educational journey, of valuing certain white male voices and certain books by white males, of people of European descent, because those were told to me, like, this is authorized view, this, these books are better, or you're going to learn more if you read these. And having to do my own work to say, like, there's lots of other books out there and lots of other people who have wisdom. And I think it's important to name that as you take this journey and hear from various voices throughout this series, that you learn to listen, that we all learn to sit and listen and to value each voice who shares through this medium, that each voice is valuable, and be careful of elevating certain voices or tuning out certain voices if they don't resonate with you or they make you uncomfortable.
Absolutely. Well, we're going to continue our conversation, of course, live. We wanted to do it this way so that we ourselves could also have an opportunity to engage in some conversation with you as we introduce the conversation. So we hope that you stick around for the latter part of our conversation and really be able to answer ask any questions that you may have, and we hope to be able to answer them and engage in dialogue. We don't have all the answers, and I don't think this is about us, having all the answers to everything. It's just about us talking things through and hoping that we can then continue to grow and come together and figure out those answers together. So we hope that you stick around. We're looking forward to having a deeper conversation, and we'll see you in a few seconds.
Wow. So, excuse me, there's a lot, right? And it's like, where do we start? And I'm following along, and I'm so happy that, we were able to do that and get into the chat in that way. I'm going to take a stab at starting us off. And again, as I noted for you guys, we have this ask the question box. We've also been commenting, but we'll try to get to everybody. We knew that this would happen. This happens a lot in my class. If any of my students out there, especially in my cultural competence class, we set out to go toward a topic and we run out of time. Some of that could be my fault because I might talk too much. But the first question that's there, Naya asked, how should we approach the conversation of privilege and racism with those who deny its existence? And I agree with you. I do believe that we can only get to a place of understanding when we have this open and respectful dialogue, and that's part of what we're doing here. I don't know if I have the answer, and I'm going to call on some of the discussion leaders to identify yourself, and if you want to come up and talk about that. But I'll tell you what I do and my answer to it. I find my voice, and for me, I've found my voice as a professor. I feel like I'm doing my part to try to break some of this down when I push for a cultural competence class, particularly in the field of psychology, knowing that those individuals are going to be out there working with diverse groups of people. And so for me, that's me doing my part. I find my voice in doing things like this and showing a passion for it, and not being willing to just stay silent, not being willing to accept that, oh, people are just going to be prejudiced or people are going to have their beliefs and there's nothing I need to do about it. I know that I won't be able to change the world. I know that I won't be able to change everyone's opinion, but I'm the kind of person that I have the optimism and enough fortitude to want to try and to at least be able to speak truth to power to myself and to really help people understand my perspective in the best way possible. So part of it sometimes can feel like that your words are falling on deaf ears or there's no purpose behind it. But I think if more people found their voice, found that place in which they can be of deeper influence, maybe we could break some of that down. I personally don't try to I don't know. I mean, sometimes I do try to be very explicit in saying, see, this is what this is. This is this privilege. How come you don't see that? But it does get to a point to where it's not going to help trying to really just hammer down on that person to convince them to believe the way that you believe, because oftentimes our perceptions are our reality. But yeah, for me, that's where I go. So I'll pause back and see who wants to speak up, starting with Dr. Rubin or Reverend Carter Thomas, and then we'll call on some other folks.
Well, your answer is a lot like mine, although much more serious. I was going to say, how do I, approach a conversation? My answer was going to be, well, get a PhD and become a professor, so you have a captive audience. But I know that is the path for very few people, and that really, like, I think if there was an easy answer to this, that wouldn't be like, we wouldn't be having this conversation, right? And the answer is really, it's determined on not just the person that you're trying to have that conversation with, but also the pre-existing relationship that you have with them. Are they a family member? Are they, some rando on Reddit? You're going to approach those very differently. And the best thing I found is, just take the high road and just try to be the better person. Practice what you preach, and just when your blood starts boiling, just chill back. Step back, chill, and don't engage anymore. There's especially on the internet, you're not going to change anyone's mind. So there's too many people out there who just want to, who are just there for the lulz and trying to get you worked up and have no earnest interest in engaging in these kind of questions. But when you do find someone who wants to engage, just patience is the key. It's maddening sometimes to hear somebody, and I saw it earlier in the chat, say Black Lives Matter, and then somebody else say, but all lives matter. And that just frustrates me to no end. But I think the only way to really come to a conversation like that is with as infinite of patience as you can muster.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Reverend Carter Thomas, did you want to pick up on that, or I'm calling on some of our other folks on there if they wanted to step in terms of how you approach this?
I'd like to call up Dr. Souther Dobbs to the screen. I know there were questions about calling in and what that means, and I think that would be helpful, especially what Dr. Rubin said about when you get frustrated and people say all lives matter, or some in the chat going back to Naya's question about how do you respond when people just disregard or disbelieve that there's racism, prejudice, privilege, or power. And I think Dr. Souther Dobbs' question or response about calling in could be a helpful response for us all to hear.
Sure. So I'm a psychologist, but I was a counselor in a previous stage of my, I'm an experimental psychologist, but was a counselor before. So calling in is not my deal. I did not make that up. I spent some time this summer in some training led by counseling psychologists who are excellent experts at just interacting with people, understanding people. And they modeled so many great ways to have conversation. And so things like drawing attention to, what are you feeling right now? How does it feel in your body to be having this conversation? And when you draw your attention in that way, you start to realize I'm having the kinds of physiological sensations that go with anxiety and stress. And so this is stressful for me. Well, what does that mean? And so calling in is related to that. It's the idea of calling out, right? Is like, you did something really wrong. And I want to draw everyone's attention to it so we can punish you. You know, we can all gang up on you, or we can cancel you. We don't want you around anymore. Calling in is a really different approach. And I think it's probably important for the people you care about, right? Your friends, your family members, your community members who you have a relationship with that person, but you're in that space where you like, I have no idea how you can think that. Terrence was mentioning in the chat, conversationally engaging. I want to know more about why you think that way or why you believe that. Tell me more about that. So those are some approaches to that calling in. I think it communicates our relationship is important to me, and that relationship can't be authentic if we're like this on this issue. So let's find the way that we can understand each other better.
Yeah, I think that's very well stated, Dr. Souther Dobbs. And I'm getting an echo. Thank you. What I would just add that, I've always been a little bit skeptical of a lot of the call out and cancel culture. Not that I think a lot of the people that get called out or get canceled or whatever it is now are probably deserving of having their misdeeds in the public and known. But I also think that for a lot of people that have been subjected to that, we need to have a pathway and a process towards repair and healing. It's not healthy for our society to constantly be tearing down any and every offender. And if we can find a way for offenders to repair the relationship they have with others, with the public in general, I appreciate the notion of calling in simply for that.
Thank you, Dr. Rubin. Yes, good words. And I think that leads into one of our next questions that has a high amount of votes there. Marcus Green's question: how can we as Lander students help our fellow peers understand the meaning behind why we say Black Lives Matter? I've seen signs in online arguments that constantly attempt to take away from the meaning by stating things such as all lives matter, which I think Dr. Rubin alluded to, the frustration and kind of a visceral response when you hear that. And I think spending some time with Marcus's question might be a good way to respond to a larger issue of just being dismissive or I love what Phyllis said, seek to understand, not to be understood, that can be hard for us when we're passionate about something, or we are set in our ways that we don't care to understand other people's perspectives. And so I could easily answer this, but Dr. Rubin, I was going to even ask before I saw Terrence's question, could you begin by elaborating on what stirs up that feeling, that sense of frustration when you hear people say all lives matter? Can you start and frame that for us? And then we may have some others fill it out.
Yes. So I think the best way to answer that is to draw on my background as a sociologist and think about the big picture of, we live in a moment in history where people have a feeling of very little control over their lives. And there's several hypotheses that have gone around to suggest, why Barack Obama got elected and why, in return, somebody who is sort of his polar opposite got elected afterwards. There's things like the economic insecurity hypothesis or the racial insecurity hypothesis, which are not mutually exclusive, that there are a number of people in the world who fear that, they are not going to be as wealthy as their parents were. And it's either because, because the economic atmosphere is completely different from a generation or two ago, or that, people who don't look like them are hopping in front of the line. To use a metaphor from Arlie Hochschild's most recent book, there's this like in the line metaphor. Well, we were next up. Why does somebody think that they can get ahead? All lives matter, not just yours. And to me, the argument of all lives matter at its core in responding to the Black Lives Matter statement is a statement about one's own sort of unconfronted anxieties, or at least speaks to a wider sort of social anxiety, even as people might translate that into their individual experiences differently. But I am totally open to hearing alternative and reasons and answers to this, because I think there are many and not just one. That's just the thing that comes to mind for me.
Thank you, Dr. Rubin. Yes, good words. And I believe you talked about something similar. I would begin with, when talking about trying to help people talk about Black Lives Matter, that we haven't really believed that in this nation, that we don't believe all lives matter. That's also why we have to name that Black Lives Matter, because when we have a nation that was built off of stealing people's land, chattel slavery, people being property, that we begin this nation on dynamics that were unequal, that were dehumanizing, anti-democratic, that even years later, right? Centuries later, we have to be able to say Black Lives Matter, because we still have to deconstruct and reconstruct to build a new future where we really can say all lives matter, because we can't say that because we don't believe that. And we are in a space in our nation where we don't live like that. I mean, in various ways, even what Dr. Rubin named in the video, whether we're trying to take people's land, build a pipeline through people's, sacred land, to where we tell people they can go, how we draw borders and how we draw zoning. And we don't really believe all people matter, whether it's educational opportunities. I saw textbook chat about textbooks earlier, and information that is left out. If all lives really mattered, we wouldn't have these kind of inequalities and inequities in our system. Dr. Parker. You're muted,
You're
Dr.
muted.
I was pushing the button, but I wasn't successful in pushing that to unmute myself. And I think too, when I'm looking at, somewhat at the chat there, this makes me think of those implicit bias, implicit, sometimes even explicit. Sometimes I think the people who will retort and say, all lives matter, are doing it just to get a rise, and are doing it just to be explicitly biased and controversial. And it's like making it clear, the human in me, the good person in me is not at all saying that all lives don't matter. And I think that's so frustrating, though, that you have to pinpoint that and push it. That of course I know that all lives matter, every person matters, but we sometimes have to, when for so long didn't experience feeling like your life mattered, you had to say it too. I think about even Sojourner to Ain't I a Woman too, when she was talking about that and she gave that speech about women's suffrage, and so she had this dual identity of she was Black and a woman, right? And then she really had to protest, but ain't I a woman? And so it's clearly we know, and all the other women matter, but I have to make name to it. It makes me think about, I mean, if even talking about current event and talking about our friendships and our relationships, when you have someone who's doing really well in life, and the need for you to say, oh yeah, me too, I just went and bought a car. It's like you have this underlying competition with them. Instead of just letting them be great in their moment, you feel like you have to add something too. That's problematic. You know what I mean? Because it's like that person is not taking anything away from you because they're celebrating themselves in that moment. Let them have their birthday. I know you guys may have also seen that video that was going around with the little girl, and she was about to blow out her birthday candles. She was 3, and the other little girl came and blew out the candles for her, and the 3-year-old got really, really mad and started fighting the little girl. It's kind of that feeling like, I'm just trying to have my moment of glory and shine, and you'll get your birthday one day, you'll get your glory one day, but it's okay if you truly don't have a certain level of bias within you, and you are a respecter of everybody else. People can have their moment, and it is frustrating, and I do take it as this strike, but I always just want people to know, but it's not because I say Black Lives Matter, it's not me at all saying that other ones don't. I wish I could see what's it. This is why we did the chat and the video on the way, because I see things being typed and I have no way of engaging in there. So I'll turn it over to somebody else who's been reading that, and any of our other discussion leaders who want to come up and speak on it as well.
Yes, I would love to hear from some of our other discussion leaders. At this time, can we bring Dr. Souther Dobbs up? She said some helpful stuff in the chat and referred to other comments, and I would love for you to speak, Dr. Souther Dobbs, more about the space before the Lives Matter, and to Jenny's comment there.
While we're bringing her up, I could, oh, never mind. There we go.
You're muted. There we go.
There's a little bit of a delay.
Yeah,
bringing up on screen. There are a lot of people in agreement here about what does it actually mean, this phrase? And so we've got a lot of people sort of in agreement about it's not what comes after that phrase, Black Lives Matter, more than anybody else's life. It's what comes before that phrase, because our criminal justice system, our education system, so many of our social spaces, if you look, you don't have to look very closely to see, they say Black lives don't matter as much as white lives. Because of that preamble, we need to say it now. We need to say it out loud to each other. Black Lives Matter. And so that's a conversation that's happening right now. I think we're kind of all in agreement on that. Yeah. I'm also not good at this, right? I'm a cognitive psychologist. So just everybody, if you think you're good at multitasking, you're not. You're
doing great with a new platform and a different way of navigating. Thank you, Dr. Souther Dobbs. This is a little bit of a move. Dr. Lopez, would you be willing to speak to us from a different angle and different lens about our topic today around prejudice, privilege, and power, and about Black Lives Matter or other lives mattering? Dr. Lopez, are you able to join us? Go ahead, Dr. Rubin, as we see if Dr. Lopez can come up. You're muted there. Go ahead, Dr. Rubin, and then we'll go to Dr. Lopez.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh. Okay.
I think to what we're probably on the same page with this, because I saw the comment, someone said, being Mexican, I feel the pain that Black people go through. And one of the things I think we need to acknowledge is that each racial, ethnic, or religious minority that exists in this country has their own distinct history. So we can see, some degree of like collective consciousness or solidarity. But in the end, every one of those experiences carries with it a different history, right? So, you know, people of Mexican descent have lived in this country since its founding. Well, since Mexico was founded, I guess. But you know, and they also, like, some come from Mexico, some come from Honduras or Puerto Rico, which those are actually Americans, et cetera, et cetera. And so, you know, we can't necessarily see like the minority experience as all the same, right? And not even within, I think I said this in the video, not even within a particular minority group. That's not a monolith either, right? Everybody's experience is different. All right, and I defer to Dr. Lopez.
Well, thank you. Well, I in my profession, I think a lot about language, and if we can, there's a three letter word that we can use that can solve the entire problem. I think Black Lives Matter too. And so we all understand here. Everyone here in this event understands that the implication of the saying is that white lives matter by default, right? But it's not clear in the sentence, so it's unfortunately gets appropriated, semantically speaking, and so it gets backlash because of that. So Black Lives Matter too will take care of it. But anyway, aside from that, I'm really of the persuasion that we just do not know enough about the other. We do not know enough about ourselves, and especially in this country. Someone was saying earlier that a lot of the nation building was accomplished on the backs of or on the heels of oppression. And I have to add that we're still doing that. We go to every restaurant in this country, or almost, and we see undocumented immigrants working at over 120-degree conditions in the heat, being paid peanuts. Yeah, that's just an example. So, you know, there's a lot of money being made on the backs of the least privileged to this day. So, if we knew a little bit more about who we are, you know, every once in a while we're watching on the TV and something bad happens, and someone comes up and says, with all the best of intentions, you know what, Americans, this is not who we are. You know what? This is exactly who we are, and this is exactly who we have been forever. We built the nation on plunder, on theft, on oppression, on genocide. You know? And so we need to get to the bottom of this, because if we do not go to the root of the problem, you know, we're just attacking the symptom. And so it all boils down to knowledge. We need to know where really this all started, you know, in my humble opinion, of course. And we're not alone. You know, other countries do the same thing. You know, we're not alone. It's just that we have this myth of American exceptionalism. You know, there's us, and then there's the others, and then we're the best. We're the good guys. Thank you, Hollywood. Hollywood does a phenomenal job publicizing the myth of American exceptionalism, and yet we're no better than others. You know, in fact, we're worse because we're more powerful. We have more guns. We have more money, and so we oppress more. And so we oppress the ones outside of our borders, and we oppress within our borders, and we continue to do so until people realize that what's really happening. So,
thank you, Dr. Lopez. Also, just based on what you said, and with the title being Prejudice, Privilege, and Power, could you speak more about how in America, along those lines, goes back to language, how we talk about undocumented peoples in this nation, and what are the stratifications? How do prejudice, privilege, and power play into how we treat, how we do policy when it comes to undocumented peoples? Anything around that? That was a lot.
An example: if I say undocumented alien, I bet everyone is thinking of someone from a Latin American country. immediately. It becomes ingrained in our collective mindset that first, all immigrants are undocumented, and then second, that most undocumented immigrants, or almost all of them, are Hispanic, and then third, all the Hispanic immigrants are Mexican, and on and on and on. And so it's just a pile of misconceptions that builds on. And so, and then you look at official documents, you look at the press, anywhere you look, you see how language pushes just the use of the word alien, for example, which is, I guess, the most really shocking, I think, example of that. Just mention alien, it's just like it dehumanizes the individual, and so it creates that barrier between us and them, which is again at the root of the problem. This division, this gap is what allows us to continue oppressing people. It's just that we do not see them as people. They're unpeople, like Noam Chomsky calls them, and so. And this is where the lack of respect, the lack of empathy all starts.
Can I ask a somewhat rhetorical follow-up? Who on screen knows what the largest source of undocumented immigration is in this country?
Well,
I hope I worded it right.
Because of geographical proximity, of course, it's Mexico.
No, it's not. It is people who have come to the country legally and overstayed their legal their visa. Yeah, so it's a little bit a trick of the wording, but yeah, a lot of people are like, "Oh, there's streams and streams of illegal immigrants." Whatever. Bad
what
word.
You're asking is how did most illegal immigrants make it to the country? And it's not by crossing the border on foot. No, that I know. Yeah. But visa overstays actually contributes to the highest number of documented immigrants in the country, but if you look at the sheer numbers, of course.
Yeah.
Dr. Parker, thank you. Dr. Lopez, thank you for your words.
Yes, I was just, and it's one, I was kind of stuck on Joanne, and thank you for naming that, and just, I'm happy that you feel the sense of inclusion and just pushing out that that's what this is about. And that's why it's so important to get multiple voices and that representation. And I can only imagine, and it just got me thinking about just even the Lander community or the Greenwood community and how often those voices of color are not represented. And I think if we continue to talk about how do we build this level of cultural competence, how do we push past and break down these issues that we have with prejudice, privilege, and power, it's doing this as well. It's having the representation and hearing from people who aren't often heard from, So thank you for being a part of this, Joanne. Thank you, Dr. Lopez, for being on here to represent that. And we need more of that. And I think it's also then having everyone in those allies pushing for that. I think I had saw a video clip, and I forget which news, and I don't know how long, and there was commentary going back and forth with someone saying, so why do we need diversity in the White House? Why is that important? Why is that such an issue? And it saddened me to why do I even have to answer that, right? And to me, it's like, because that's the point. That's what we have to get past. And I know some people might argue that just seeing the diversity and the differences in people doesn't solve the problem, but it's a start, and it isn't, because then we talk about that level of inclusion, because I don't want to be the token and just being there just because you see my face. But then it's like, then how are we, what role are we in and how are we being used? But that's another step toward that cultural competence. I know one of the questions that I had posed when we were in the green room before, and I'm constantly thinking, why do we do this work? What's the point? Why do we keep on? How do we know that we're getting there? In the cultural competence class that I teach, I even on Wednesday's class, and I left with, I said, I saw cultural competence in action. And it may seem weird when I give you this example. I saw it in action when I was watching television, and it was a commercial for Always maxi pads. And I know some of you men are like, no, but it was really interesting because I noticed this subtle change in how the commercial is being presented and the color of the liquid that they use. It's no longer blue, it's red. It's like, okay, these are women, these are their lives, it's not taboo. And I noticed that the women that were representing the commercial were very curvy or thin or brown skin, light skin, different shapes. And then they were showing examples of the real things that women go through during that time. And it made me realize, I said, that's cultural competence right there, because either they've diversified their marketing team and they have other people on there who are really just making better decisions, or even if all the men, the marketing team are still men, those men are culturally competent enough to say, this is who we're really dealing with. And for me, I want to see more of that in my life. I want to normalize being diverse, right? And that's the point of us doing this work, and being able to have a language and taking away some of the taboo nature of it. Because, when we talk about culture too, culture is not just race. It's not just Black, white, Latino. It's not that. It's all of these things, our values, our beliefs, our gender, our, different norms and all those things. And so wanting to just normalize that we all have differences. And so I just wanted to lift that and push forward and saying, this is why we have to do this work. This is why we have to talk about this. What I had posed earlier asking, like, what's the end game? And I know my husband one time asked me that. He said, so what if all of the white people that deny that they have white privilege one day decided that they recognize that they have privilege? Then what? And I was stumped. I was kind of like, I don't know how to answer that. What if people start to do that? What does it look like? Does that change anything? Will people stop utilizing their privilege even if they recognize they have it? And I guess I'm kind of posing that question out there if somebody else even wants to answer that. So what if we do get to the point and we're successful in convincing people and getting them to recognize that, number one, this country has always been problematic, and it was built on those foundations, and we accept, and we start to get to a point to where we can get this certain level of reconciliation. And I don't think we can ever truly reconcile until we really agree that, yeah, there's some oppression truly happening, and it's not in the past, it's current, as was already pointed out, that these are things that are currently still happening. But what if we get to that point and it's all figured out and people recognize it? Then what? I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. I think that's a good question. We would love to hear from people who may have answers. I will just say, in my own life, where I recognize my own sense of privilege, I think it's pushed me to ask questions about who's not in the room, who's not at the table, because having a higher education degree and there's certain privileges that come with that. And so it's even pushed to me to say, just as a Black woman in the US, I need to own my own privileges and ask questions and have conversations across, boundaries with people I don't know, people who have different experiences being in America, whether that's people who are undocumented, people who've moved here from other countries. I don't know it all, and I need to learn from other people. And so I think my own sense of privilege, realizing my own sense of privilege, has pushed me to say, like, how am I using my privilege to open up doors for other people? Or in my class today, in Black religious women, I asked how many of them have, in their course of studies, many of them have different majors, how many of them have read books by people of color in their classes? And only out of the 10 people, one said, yeah, in my sociology classes, we talk about people of color. But most of them said, no, we don't read other books. We don't read people who are not of European descent. And so I think part of my course is to encourage them to open up, like, hey, I'm sharing these resources and teaching you about things with the hope that you will pass this on in your sense of privilege, that you will talk more about other Black people than Martin Luther King and Rosa Parks.
Mm-hmm.
Challenge your friends to name more people than just Martin Luther King and Rosa Parks. Get to know those names. Mm-hmm. And just to my attempt to answer what Dr. Parker, you asked, what do we do if we solve racism? To be a little reductionist about it. And I mean, what you're describing is a utopian state. So it's something that perhaps never can be achieved, in the sense that any society will always have some form of inequality. And so if we overcome racial inequality, we put that energy into some other form of inequality and addressing that. And I think over time, our society can become more, I guess, enlightened is probably the best word, or more, we can see progress towards minimizing inequalities. If that ever happens, we'll just move on to the next form of inequality, and hopefully it'll be, the quality of everyone's life will improve having completed that step.
We'd like to bring Dr. Ryan up. Was that what you were going to say, Dr. Parker? I think we'd love to hear from Dr. Ryan. She said some great things in the chat. Dr. Ryan, would you join us on screen? It takes a moment to connect, but we would like to hear more about some of the things you mentioned about privilege and what does it mean, to answer Dr. Parker's question about what happens next. So what? Go for it. Muted.
I'm not sure I'm answering the question, or maybe contributing to the question. I was talking to a local police officer not too long ago, and he said, we were talking about privilege, and he was saying there isn't any. There's no bias in policing. And he, in the same conversation, said, I saw a young person who I knew had committed a crime running towards me down my neighborhood street. I said, well, how did you know he committed a crime? He said, well, he was wearing a hoodie, and he looked guilty, and he looked scared. And I was standing there in a hoodie, and I said, I'm wearing a hoodie right now. And if I saw you coming toward me with a grumpy face, I would probably be scared. And he said, no, this person was guilty. And I said, well, how did you know? And the one thing he never actually came out and said was the race of the person, but it was pretty clear that that was the thing that was causing it. Because I said, but I'm wearing a hoodie. Why aren't you sure that I'm guilty of something? And he said, well, you're you. And I was like, so anyway, that was the conversation I had. It doesn't solve any of the problems, but it illustrates them, I think.
Thank you, Dr. Ryan. I'm curious, would you speak to this? Because in our conversations, I've noticed you've done a good job in being able to name your privilege and allow that to affect the way you interact with others and live in the world in your teaching and just in what you read. Would you speak to maybe parts of that and encourage some of our other participants and listeners about what it means to own your sense of privilege and how to use that to do good in the world and open up opportunities for others?
I'm not even sure how to way to put me on the spot. Okay. I had a story. That's all I had. I never thought about privilege for the longest time because I grew up poor. So it never occurred to me that there was privilege in my life until I realized when I got to grad school that I had gone to an all-white college, and that even though I didn't have any money, they went out of their way to make sure that I got to go to this private school, and everyone at that school pushed me forward. And then I went to a public university for grad school, and I realized there were a whole lot of different people in this world, and their experiences of it were very different than mine. And even then I still didn't quite get it until I looked around, and all of the jobs at USC that involved cleaning or groundskeeping were done by Black people. And all of the jobs that involved managing or teaching, at least in the space that I was in, those jobs were done by white people and people from European descent or even immigration. And it's a completely different way of seeing things. And then last year, and even then, until last year, I didn't understand. Well, I'm not doing a good job. You put me on the spot and I'm all confused. So I had a friend come visit from the north, and I said, when we walk down the street in Greenwood, if a Black man is walking towards us, he will get off the sidewalk and cross the street and walk down the other side because he doesn't want to give the impression of having caused offense. He's afraid of what will happen in that moment. And she's like, no. This is whatever year it was, 2005 or whatever. I was like, yes, you will. When we walk downtown, watch what happens. And sure enough, there was a very nice man walking towards us, and about 30 yards away from us, he crossed the street all the way across Main Street and walked down the other side. And she looked at me and went, he really did it. I went, he really did. And I'm not scared to walk down the street and talk to people. I don't have that fear. And then last year, when everything just kind of went insane, and I realized I didn't know anything. I didn't know anything until Ahmaud Arbery died. And I realized that people were being hunted in the street, and I am never hunted in the street. I can go running through Greenwood anytime I want to, and I have no fear. And when I started teaching at Lander, and young people wouldn't look me in the eye because they'd been taught not to, so they wouldn't give offense. And I had to learn why that was, because I didn't know. And so I don't ever want that to be true for any kid. Any kid coming into my class should be able to look me in the eye. And any kid walking across the street shouldn't be worried about having to cross. So I started listening more than talking, I hope. I don't know. Did I do what you wanted me to do?
Yes,
Okay.
yes, you did. And I think that's important to name too, as I'm listening to you, some of this stuff, and I'm thinking and trying to put myself in other people's shoes, or listening to the conversations I've had with people when they may hear a story like what you told, and they're like, some of this stuff is implicit, like we don't know, or we've been conditioned to even react that way. I even just think about, like, as a woman, I had to learn to stop saying I'm sorry, like when I was in all man rooms and everything, and I would say, oh, I'm sorry, but I just no, because we've been taught in a way to minimize ourselves, and we have to seem a little bit more meek, and it's those kinds of things, just like you said, with the eye contact with students. Like, I think sometimes they may not even realize that they're doing it because we've been conditioned to behave in certain ways, and it's all built around this privilege that exists, and these differences and this division. So we're getting to a point where we have to start to wrap up, and we never can leave these things in a good place, because there's no, like I said earlier, there's no real full answers. Hopefully you feel like you've grown closer, or you have some other ways to think about some of these conversations, and it's helping and giving you more to think about. And it's so important that we continue these conversations outside of this platform. Your perspective is going to change frequently. You're going to think about things more. You'll probably get off and say, gosh, I wish I would have said this or that. It's going to happen. Or it's like, no, that's not what I really meant to say. I didn't phrase it the right way. And that's okay. But this is why we start these conversations and find different language and hear from other people. I do want to pause and see, is there anyone else? I know all of our discussion leaders that are behind the scenes, we didn't get to everybody yet. And obviously not today, will we? But if there's someone who has a burning statement or anything that you want to say, you can even just put that in the chat box to bring you up. And if there's any last major comments or questions from students, please feel free to leave that. I do, as I'm talking and saying that, please make sure y'all are doing it. All the Lander students that are on here, and obviously it seems like many of you have had us as a professor, or currently have some of us as professors. We are so happy to continue these conversations and to continue talking about these things. So please bring them up and talk to your peers. Those of you in the Greenwood community, we're excited to be able to continue these conversations as well, and to have them together. But I see Dr. Creighton, you're up, and go ahead. I'll stop.
Oh, I really don't know that I deserve to get the last word. We're running out of time, but I've just been sitting here stewing on this question of, what do I do about my awareness of my own privilege, and I'm thinking about this idea of how implicit our understanding of our behavior is that you're talking about. And I think that for me, one really important thing is just, I have to force myself to ask really hard questions about why I react the way I react, and why I like the things I like, and why I like the people I like. And as somebody who's finally reached a point in my life where I get to distribute power to a certain extent, I get to enable other people's success. One thing I've just really scrutinized lately is if I have a strong positive reaction to a student, it's often because they remind me a little bit of myself at their age, and I have had to, I think, force myself to think more deeply about how I was the way I was and how I am the way I am now. I'm not articulating that very well. And really try to see the younger people in front of me with way more texture than just the superficial resemblance to things that they have in common with past me. And I think until we can get to that point where we're interrogating gut reaction in ourselves, it's hard to really make a big change.
Agreed.
Thank you, Dr. Creighton. Good words. Yes, we are coming to the end of time. Just a few notes as we end. First, thank you for being here. Thank you to our community members who have joined us from the first time. I even saw some were from out of state, Lander alumni. Thank you. Thank you to professors and Lander community students. We hope that you will continue to join us for our next session, our next dialogue, which is session 2 on the legacy of Dr. Benjamin Elijah Mays, which will take place here in Crowdcast. You can go through the link on the website, and that will be on Thursday, February 4th at 5:30. In closing words, we'd like to offer up the Dean, Dr. McMillan. Will you join us for closing words for today? We bring up Lucas McMillan to our screen. Thank you all. Thank you for being here.
While he's coming up, I just want to say hi, Mom. Hi, Dad. Thanks for tuning in. Speaking of people from out of state.
Right. And I'll add too, if you are looking for like the list of the other sessions, you'll see down that green button that's down there says learn more about the race and identity dialogue. After this, you can click on that and go to the information about the other sessions. And then also just a reminder, some of you were asking about if this recording will be shared. This exact same link that you used to log into this will be, once this is all done, it will turn into the video recording. And then you're welcome to share that. And it's also going to live on our website as well. So this will be there for you to be able to look at. So Dr. McMillan.
Well, I just wanted to say that we are so very glad that everybody is partaking in this series. We had an offering of this just for ourselves at Lander last fall, and we had a lot of good feedback and participation from our students and our faculty and our staff. And we are so glad to be in season 2 in this spring semester, and to welcome not just more students and staff and faculty at Lander, but those of you outside our campus. And we're so glad that some of you participating are part of the Lander family already, in our alumni family and in our community. So I think this is going to be a wonderful series. I thank its leaders, Dr. Parker and Reverend Carter Thomas, and for all those that are participating. And I'm enjoying learning right along with you.
Thank you. It is 6:59, so we're going to keep to our time. And please share this information with others who you think might benefit and find this conversation enriching. Feel free to share the link, check out, it's a good thing to look at the website, mark your calendar for future dates in which you're able to join us. And when the session ends, it actually ends, it's, for those who have done Zoom meetings, it closes the session. So just wanted to say thank you. We hope you'll go back, share the recording. And Dr. Parker, are we good?
I think we are good to go. Let's go ahead and end our broadcast. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Rubin.